Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eduardo, and today I'll be covering the reuse library, not only how to use it, some of the benefits, but also talking about setting this up for your environment. So we'll get started with the introduction. Okay, so what is the reuse library? So the reuse library is a collection of commonly used parts. These could be standard parts, common geometry that your company uses, symbols, notes in a drafting environment, anything that is an NX object, you can pretty much reuse and have that in a library format. And some of the key benefits here is, of course, you want to reduce duplicates. So not only to avoid boggling down your system, but also to reduce the time wasted looking for components, recreating some components, some hardware that already exists, and someone already put in the time and effort for that. You want to go ahead and standardize geometry as well. So if you use a specific type of geometry, and there are a couple different differences in that. You can leverage the part family template, so you standardize that. And of course, that will help in incorporating modular designs. If you have a couple different variations of your designs, you use that across your different products, you can go ahead and standardize that and leverage some modular designs as well. Okay, so now let's talk about the interface and what that looks like and how you can get started using the reuse library. So the reuse library is part of your navigator panel on the left-hand side of your NX environment. And it looks like this here, where you have a bunch of folders in here. And this captures some of the out-of-the-box options. So we have the reuse examples folder, we have 2D section library, we have the UDF library. So these are all standard out of the box options. Okay. So the idea here is you would go to your navigator, select the reuse library, the specific folder that you want that standard part to be in, and you would navigate and look for that. And so in this example here, we're looking at the reuse examples folder, looking into the standard parts folder, and then narrowing that our search to the bolt and then the hex head bolt. And so once we get to that point, we basically drag and drop our results into the assembly, and we have our drop down options for that specific geometry. So in this case, I have a couple primary parameters to choose from. So I have that hex bolt selected, the size, the length, thread type. And depending on how you have your standard parts family created, you can add more drop-down options in these parameters. So you can add materials, locking features, things like that. So it makes it very beneficial for a designer to just pull this from their library, down select on a specific size, spec, and then add that to the assembly. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate that workflow right now in an NX example. Okay, so I'm working in NX 2306. This is a native environment, so I'm off of Team Center, but I'll go ahead and talk about what that looks like in Team Center later on. And so right now I have this pump assembly, and my objective is to add some bolts on the top of this head here. And so what I'll do is I'll go and look for the reuse library navigator. And as you can see, I have these nodes here that are part of my current library environment. And so what I'll do is I'll expand reuse examples. So if you hover over that, you'll see the directory of where this lies. So this is out of the box in your program files, 2306 folders, NX parts, reuse library. Okay. Then here, we'll go ahead and expand standard parts. There are a couple folders in here. We are using the ANSI inch for this example and the hex head fastener. So I'll expand this member select option. I see my hex bolt, and then I can simply drag and drop into this environment. Okay. Then depending on how your material attributes are set up, your customer defaults, I'll go ahead and either specify one, or if you have it set up in your environment as a primary parameter, so you can go ahead and include that as a drop-down option. Okay, so now basically I'm looking at the drop-downs. In this case, I'm looking for a 1/4 inch fastener with 1.5 inch in length, and that thread type will keep that as UNC. Okay. As you can see, you can go ahead and toggle down and down select. It also provides some really good insight to the attributes. So this is your, what your part number is, your part name, description, all that. And this is all controlled in your part family environment. Okay. All right, so simple enough, search, navigate for that hex head, bring it into your assembly, a simple drag and drop, down select, and now I can go ahead and quickly constrain my my part here. So I'll constrain it. Okay, and then the nice thing about using this as well is you can use the pattern component, so you're not going through the same operations multiple times. You can simply select your pattern, your component to pattern, select those holes, select the first instance, and just with the simple constraints and pattern feature, I'm able to assign 12 different bolts at this, all at once pretty much. Okay. So that's the basic workflow is, as a designer, you want to go ahead and use the reuse library, so you're not spending time recreating this bolt. You're not going into McMaster-Carr or a different website, downloading those, renaming them, and then creating duplicates in your system. Okay, so I'm going to jump back into the slides here, and I'm going to start talking about setting this environment up. Really, this is the key, right? This is the the heavy lifting for most companies is setting up the reuse library. So I'll talk through those steps, and then I'll talk through some takeaways after this to help you get some quick wins in your company. Okay, so there's a couple first things you want to do when setting up the reuse library. And the first thing is you want to define as a company what reusable standard parts you want to start with. So I suggest keeping this simple, straightforward. Start with 3 to 10 parts that you guys constantly use, right? Specific size bolts, washers, nuts, common hardware, and start that so your designers have that available. So first thing is defining what those are, and then setting those up in your part family environment. So this screenshot here is the out-of-the-box hex bolt part family spreadsheet, and it has those out-of-the-box part numbers, part names, description. So what I would recommend is starting here, maybe modifying an existing part family. So for hex bolts, you may want to modify the part numbering convention to match what you guys are using, and add a material drop-down option, perhaps add some different sizes, a locking feature, things like that. Okay, so that's step one, is defining what hardware you want in there and some quick wins by modifying an existing part family. Okay. Then step two is setting up your folder structure and directory. This is what is going to connect all your designers and allow them to use the same library and have access to existing work. So they're not duplicating that work. and they have all that in their NX environment. They're not going outside of NX to search for parts. Everything's set up ahead of time. So right now in this example, I have a simple NX settings folder on my desktop. But ideally, that would sit in a shared network environment for everyone to have access to. And then from there, there's the different nodes. So in this example here, I have a folder for the ANSI inch spec, and then within that folder, I have a folder for bolts, nuts, pins, screws, and washers. So those are pretty good size of library to start with. Okay, then from here, we have step 3, which is updating the customer defaults, ideally at the site level. So you only modify this once and all your designers have that same settings. And so you basically create a new directory in here. So under gateway, reuse library in general, you have the option to add multiple folders and nodes in here when you're working in native NX. If you're working in Team Center, it's slightly different, but much easier to manage. So we'll talk about that later on as well. But here, all you have to do is pretty much mimic the same nomenclature and syntax that the existing reuse examples provides. So we'll go through that example here. And then the fourth thing you want to consider is if you're working natively, you have to pay attention to your assembly load options because the purpose of the reuse library is to avoid duplicates. You will not save your standard parts into a local folder. They will exist within that directory we talked about in step 2. And so you want to pay attention to what your assembly load options and um, best practice is to load as saved. So wherever that fastener is saved, it'll pull from there as opposed to the out of the box option, which is from folder. Okay. All right, so I'll go ahead and jump into that demonstration. So I'll show you guys what that looks like. And let's see. Okay, so now I have okay, so first thing is let me go ahead and show you what that NX environment or reuse directory looks like. So I have this NX settings folder that lives on my desktop, but like I mentioned before, you want that in a shared network drive. And then I have a reuse library folder in here. Okay? And in this folder, I have that ANSI inch, which I mentioned. And so ideally, like I said before, you want to start with the out-of-the-box options. So that resides in your program files, Siemens, whatever version of NX you're using, NX parts, and then the reuse library. Okay. So if I go, I can see the rest of these folders, right? And so from here, I can start with these. So maybe these are the only specs I'll care about. And so I can go ahead and start with that, modify them as I grow and collaborate with my, my team, what needs to be in here, what doesn't, and then modify the part family libraries. Okay. So from here, I have my directory set up. I have the components I want to start with. And so now all I have to do is connect that from the NX environment. And so you'll do that by going to your file, utilities, customer defaults. Okay. Then under gateway, you'll see reuse library somewhere here. Okay. Then in this navigator tab, you'll see the option to add libraries natively. Okay. So the syntax is as follows. The first, anything before this line is the name of the node that you'll see in the reuse navigator. So in this case, I'll go ahead and just type in Saratech, and then I'll add my folder directory, which is this right here. So I can simply copy this and paste that directory. Okay. Now this is set up for my user defaults level. If you're an NX admin, you would have access to the site level and this customer defaults DPV file that will allow you to distribute this to the rest of your team. So it makes the setup a lot easier if you have that available. Okay, so I'll hit OK, and all I have to do is restart my NX sessions. So those defaults are saved. And so let me go ahead and do that as well. But right before I do that, let me go ahead and update my assembly load options. So the default, like I said before, is from folder. So this part is not saved in the existing folder. It's saved in my reuse library environment. So I have to save this or change it to as saved. Now I can go ahead and restart my environment. Let me hit ES. Now let me restart my NX session, and we should see that Saratech folder in the reuse library environment. Alrighty. Okay, so I'll open up the pump assembly again, and from here, okay, so from here, looks like I need to update the right access. So I have access to this folder, so I'll look at that again. But now if I go into my reuse library, I should see my, let's see, my standard parts and my Saratech folder. Let's see if that came through. Okay, so back to gateway, reuse library, examples. Let's see, it looks like that was not saved here. Let me try that one more time. So it looks like the old version was saved. Run as admin. All right, so it is restarting at the moment. Okay, let me double click on this. Okay, and there you go. So now I have those bolts pulling in. So this confirms that the my load options are working correctly. I have the as saved setting configured. Then if I go into my reuse library here, I now see that Saratech folder. And so here I can confirm all the additional standards that I copied from the out-of-the-box options. I can see those in here, and I can down select again. Right, so if I need to add some fasteners in here as well, I can go ahead and work through the same operation. Okay. Okay. And so again, this is a really good start for any company to start building their reuse library. So leverage the out-of-the-box options, modify those existing part families, and so your designers can start saving some time with standard parts. Okay, let me jump back into the presentation and then wrap this up and open the floor for questions. So we talked about just the simple workflow, right? Every designer understands the pain of having to search for standard parts and wasting time for something that's off the shelf that should be simple to just grab and go. So the workflow is basically, sticking to the NX environment as much as possible, pointing to a shared directory, and then modifying that and growing that as your company requires more needs. So the reuse library, in summary, enables you to reduce duplicates, reduce time wasted searching, creating parts, recreating parts, helps you standardize geometry, and then leverage and create modular designs in the future. So overall, really good tool to use, but especially helpful if it's maintained, if the designer has that environment to pull from. So those are the next steps to helping you guys grow in your NX journey. So now let me go ahead and open the floor up to uh, any questions there maybe.
Okay, perfect. So our first question, so it seems you use part family tables. This seems recommended, but is it required?
Part family tables is it is required for standardizing different dimensions, different sizes. So I would say yes, it's required. Um, but the only way around this, I'd say, is if you have a specific part file for different sizes, which isn't efficient, you would really want to handle that in a part family table.
Okay, then our next question is, how do you go about adding another size to a current standard part family?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that goes back into leveraging what's out of the box already, right? So this hex bolt, we talked about that. So what you can do is, and I'll show that here, is, let's see, I have that hex bolt. I can go ahead and open this up here. Yeah. So if you go into your tools, part families environment, right now it's read only, but if you have this saved where you have right axis, you can modify this. And this is where you can add um, different sizes. So here, this table contains all the different sizes, all the geometries, all the sketch variables per that size. And so if you want to add another size, you can go ahead and write to this spreadsheet. If you want to add a material, you can go ahead and add a column in here. Um, Perhaps you go into your material attributes. Right now, nothing exists, but you would create the attribute, bring this in, and then modify that as well. So this is kind of where your setup will be.
Okay, and then were you going to show setting up a reuse library using Team Center, or did I miss it somehow?
No, so okay, so that will be a future CES session. But for the setup itself, it's pretty much the same, and it's much easier in Team Center to manage because you don't have to deal with the assembly load options and your different folders and directories. So it is the same environment for that setup, but if you want, some hands-on instructions on how to do that, we can go ahead and set up a call. But pretty much from the customer default standpoints, you'll be doing the same thing. Gateway, reuse library, general, and then you want to pay attention to your shared library configuration file. Right now, this is native. You'd be working in Team Center, and then in Team Center, you would have folders as well where your part families live in. So it's pretty similar, but we would have to look in your environment to see, how it's currently set up, or if you need help setting that up, we can walk you through that as well.
Okay, what about organizing reused feature groups and sketches in the reuse library rather than part families?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So here you can see there are part families, right? And there's some out-of-the-box options for 2D section libraries. So in this case, right, there may be some, it's not 3D geometry, it's sketch geometry. So you can add that in here. And a good way to, a good kind of first step to do is organize this. There's a lot of things that you're not going to use. And so what you can do is go into your library management settings and look at specifically for modeling, what do I want in here? I don't care about um, some of these different libraries, out of the box libraries. So I can condense this and I can create one specifically for 2D sections, specifically for, um, if you're working with extruded parts, you can have those in here as well. So I would recommend filtering this down to what you need. And then in these libraries, again, if you're working with 2D parts, start with this directory, copy this, and then modify it to match your needs. So you can build everything from here.
Okay, well, if no more questions come in, I believe that is going to be it.